Thank you very much, Dr. Ricketts, Madam Master of Ceremonies. I must acknowledge our guest from the UK and guest speaker, Honorable Jeremy Corbyn and Mrs. Corbyn. It's a pleasure to have you here in Jamaica again, sir. There's been a lot of protocol observing, and I'm tempted to adopt the protocols as observed. Should acknowledge my colleague parliamentarian, Dr. Tufton, who has a view, an agitating view of certain things, which is a good thing. And of course, I want to begin by congratulating Professor Tony Bogues and the other organizers of this inaugural Caribbean Prime Ministers Conference, which is in honor of Michael Manley, in anticipation of his upcoming 100th anniversary of his birth, and to the various institutional sponsors who have come together. I say it's a wonderful thing that has happened here today. I should acknowledge two important persons who are here, the Manley family and the representatives of the current generations who are with us, Sarah, Rhea and Maya, Joe, and of course, Beverly and Glyn Manley, Manley Duncan. There is no doubt. Oh, and there's one other acknowledgement. I just want to also acknowledge the representatives of the Cuban embassy who are here as well, who have not been acknowledged. There's no doubt that Michael Manley was a most consequential Caribbean political leader, and it is indeed fitting that the occasion of his centennial, upcoming septennial on the 10th of this month, has been the catalyst for the inauguration of a Caribbean Prime Ministers Conference series. It is my hope that this conference and the others to come in the future will provide timely opportunities for Caribbean intellectuals, students, and the wider public to celebrate and critique our region's political leaders, their achievements, their failings, as we seek to deepen our understanding of the region's modern political history and the forces that have shaped the choices we have made on our road to development. As the current president of the People's National Party, I stand on the shoulders of the 5 leaders who came before me, and I am fortunate to have had a personal relationship with 4 of those 5, the first of those 4 being Michael Manley, who I initially got to know as a teenager in the early 1880s when I was friendly, 1980s, a centennial out, when I was friendly with his then wife Beverly's niece, and I was a regular visitor to their home on Washington Close. And then later, in the 1990s, when having retired from politics, he was the principal consultant on the Government of Jamaica's Employee Share Ownership Plan program, ESOP program. And I was involved in the legal work to develop the ESOP legislation. We worked closely for a couple of years on that program. That happenstance meant that we met at least once a month on his veranda at Heathwood to discuss the ESOP program, but invariably the conversation would end up drifting into current affairs, as he would exhort persons of my generation, like me, to get involved in the political life of our country, and he was very passionate about that. And this was towards the end of his life, so some of those meetings he was in his light blue pajamas, but his passion never waned. I would never have imagined that one day I would be giving remarks in the capacity as the leader of the PNP at a conference in his honor. So life really is serendipitous. Michael Manley was a Jamaican Renaissance man, a passionate intellectual with a wide range of interests, including a deep love of sports, art, and music. His oratory and charm were unparalleled, And I believe it is safe to say that he is the most loved political leader that Jamaica has produced. With the benefit of hindsight, he's also increasingly recognized as a visionary leader whose ideas for creating a more fair and just society out of the cauldron of our colonial experience were often before their time. Michael Manley was courageous. He recognized that incremental adjustments to the status quo would not meet the needs and expectations of the majority of Jamaicans. And he was always willing to make bold steps towards the positive transformation of the society. During his first period as Prime Minister from 1972 to 1980, his policies and programs were developed through a democratic socialist ideological prism. This necessitated far-reaching changes to Jamaica's economy and society, which after a decade of independence, or political independence, had continued to be structured along classist, elitist, and race-configured colonial norms. Over the course of those 8 years, Jamaica was deeply transformed in profound ways never attempted, much less achieved, either before or since. The influence of Michael Manley's thought and mission reverberated across the region and made him a towering third world figure on the world stage. The backlash to this transformation that was instigated by the political representatives of the privileged status quo in Jamaica, aided by their external Cold War backers, was relentless and vicious, resulting in a concerted propaganda war against his government and this intensification of political violence as a tool of destabilization, which ultimately resulted in the bloody 1980 election defeat of the PNP. While a lot has been said and written about that period of our history, I would argue that much of the truth of what took place then remains unsaid, other than in private conversation. And such is the vestigial, unresolved impact of the divisions of that era on the nation's consciousness, that there is no process at play for the truth to come out. So, Chris, I think your argument that we are driven by the context in which we live and the circumstances in which we live, and in the context of a small island like Jamaica or a region like the Caribbean, the world forces at play, the geopolitical forces at play, are sometimes greater than we are able to withstand, and we're constantly adjusting to that. I think it's a fair point. I wouldn't say we're victims of it, because to some extent they present opportunities as well. But in the 1970s, it played out in Jamaica in the Cold War era in a particularly vicious way. While that first 8-year period of Michael Manley's career in government generally attracts the most attention and is often viewed nostalgically as the heyday of progressive achievement in Jamaica, his second period as Prime Minister was also very consequential. In fact, certainly in terms of economics, the latter period has had a more lasting impact than the first. Part 2 of Michael Manley in government established the basic economic model that Jamaica has been pursuing for the past 40 years. He recognized the leadership role of business in driving economic growth and was induced, persuaded, cajoled by the private sector in the context of the prevailing Washington consensus that had emerged, I suppose, out of the ending of the Cold War and the defeat of the left in Europe. He proceeded to rapidly liberalize the economy, removing exchange controls, eliminating price controls, and substantially getting rid of the licensing regimes for exports and imports. And this was done with the encouragement, as I've said, of the leaders of the private sector at the time. But it took Jamaica a long time to learn the rules and techniques of managing a small, open economy. I would therefore argue that the seeds of the past decades' debt reduction and other macro-fiscal successes that Jamaica is internationally recognized for were really sown by Michael Manley's bold reforms in part 2 of his government, which created the basic economic model that is prevailing and will prevail for some time. Though, as has been said, the inherent structural and other inconsistencies of that model necessitate further thought and further change. And the task of our times will be, how do we negotiate, identify and negotiate solutions for dealing with that within the context of the lessons that we have learned as an independent country so far. The unresolved challenge we face as a nation is how to move from macro-fiscal stability to inclusive, sustainable development that works for all Jamaicans. There is much in the teachings of Michael Manley, thankfully committed by him to writing in his many books and recorded speeches, that remains relevant to the task at hand. The principles of social justice and equality of access to opportunity, which Michael Manley steadfastly championed like no other throughout his life, must remain our guide in the search for solutions as we embark on yet another era of the politics of change. Thank you. I hope this conference will provide ample opportunities to expand and develop some of these ideas. One love.